folks, I am Dave. That's me.
I'm Sean.
And he's the other fella. And we are Barstools and Bandtalk. And tonight, we've kind of gone a little local, but not really local because he's got quite a history all around the world being a professional drummer. And I'm going to let Sean bring him on, but I'm very excited to have him on here tonight.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. I've known this man a little bit for the last, 10, 15 years. Known a lot of guys around him. He's done a lot, and I actually did a little bit of research before I decided to come on here about this fella. Yeah, believe it or not. And we are absolutely jazzed to have the wonderful, the talented Mr. Tom Roach.
All right, let's bring him on. He should be right down there. There he is.
Hey.
How you doing, brother?
I'm great, man. Yourself?
Well, doing really well. So yeah,
I told you, Tom. I told you I did a little research before I started, and I talked to a number of people that have been in contact and played with you. So I'm going to give you kind of a caption of what they said, and I want to hear what you have to say about it. Wow. So I said, "Tell me about Tom Roach." They said, "Consistent, unflappable, awesome, but understated." And they said, when they play with you, they don't have anything to worry about. So what do you think about that?
Well, firstly, it's very flattering, man, and wonderful to hear. Consistency is, a big part of doing the gig, and I've done a lot of different types of gigs. So I think being consistent is part of my approach, to making sure that I have the bases covered first, and then if I can sneak a little awesome in there, I'm all the better for it, right?
A little awesome. Come on now.
Well, it's very kind of people to say lovely things, and they're going to, and I appreciate it. But honestly, I've been a professional drummer for a long time, and I think longevity of that is really dependent on doing the job well and being consistent and being dependable and taking care of business, right?
Well,
happy to hear those comments.
As a drummer myself, you sometimes play with people and they say, he doesn't get this, he doesn't get that. But everybody that I talked to had very nice things to say about you. So that speaks to what you bring to the table.
Again, I'm flattered, man. And, yourself, you guys have been in the business long enough to know that you're not always the best guy for the job. And there's a lot of great players out there. So to be able to navigate through and make myself as consistent as possible and keep myself working, it's been good that way,
Well, I did a little bit of research myself down Tom Roach, I'll tell you, and what I've heard is that you were on more than at least 100 different recordings. Is that true?
Yeah, for sure. And I kind of thought I'd keep track of that stuff, but after a while, it doesn't seem to matter as much, and my career took a couple of different paths. And most of the recording happened earlier on in my career. I still do some. I did one recently with a guy named Brad Reed, Celtic artist, and I've done some smatterings of recordings over the last decade or so. But earlier on, when I was doing the freelance gigging and touring, I did a lot of work at CBC.
Okay.
A lot of the CBC work was leased. I did one myself there. Same purpose, you go in and do a radio show, and you lease it back from CBC. So most of the work, not all of it, but most of it was out of the CBC studio, Studio H, and lots of other things too, and some great, some highlights in there. Lots of stuff that, frankly, as a studio guy, you get a call and you come in and play with somebody you never play with again. And I was fortunate enough to get the calls to do it, but also, there's not a lot of follow-up. But the ones that were really significant are the artists that I worked with over the years that did recordings that I was part of. But that's true. I was on a lot of records.
So you're a boy from New Waterford.
I am a Waterford boy.
I'm originally from Sydney, so we both escaped Fantasy Island, so that's kind of cool. So back when you started, how'd you get your start, and what were some of the things that you were doing to kind of learn? Because you've played with a lot of different people, a lot of different styles, and and I know that most guys, when they're learning, they might stick to one or maybe two styles, but you really kind of painted the brush all over the place. So just talk a little about that.
Well, interestingly, I started very young, just like a kid. I got, we just passed Christmas. I got a set when I was 7 years old for Christmas. So I don't even remember why. I was
about 22 years ago then, I guess, eh? 22 years ago.
Yes. I'm a little past 50-year anniversary, actually. Tim Black, well, I shouldn't tell anybody of this, but I did a little something on my 50th anniversary with Tim and got a drum set for somebody who needed one. But I've been doing this a long time. I'm going to be 62 next month, and so I've been playing drums for a while, But when I was a kid, I started gigging, literally. Like my father would take me to gigs and drop me off, pick me up when I was 13, 14, 15. So I played with the local guys in the Waterford and around the area. And those guys taught me a lot about all kinds of regular gigging and playing. And then I focused in on a band program at the Waterford, and I was one of the first group of kids that went through the band. So I got music lessons and theory lessons. Played another instrument, learned how to read music. Then I went to university and studied music. So it expanded from just gigging around and self-taught until I went to university, and then I sort of. And I guess the combination of early styles and early exposure to all kinds of stuff helped. But then I kind of honed my skills. And once you learn how to play the drums, you can apply that to pretty much any style if you're interested in the style. So that's good. Lots of styles in there.
So, to that point, I mean, so you start to play. I'm going to ask you a question. In business, they talk about networking. They talk about knowing people. I would have to say that you probably developed some of those early networks when you were younger that maybe helped you out later on.
Well, I've kind of been transplanted a couple of times. So when I grew up in Waterford, I was, it was sort of a joke in our house. When the phone rang, I'm a Tom Jr., so they'd ask for Tom, and my mother would say which one, and it was either my father or the drummer. So I said, which one, the drummer. So I got gigs early from people who just needed a player, right? And so the word of mouth got around, and I had such nice support from people who helped older guys than me because I was a kid. When I went to school, I went to Boston. So that took me out of that totally. And I've never been back to Cape Breton permanently since I left when I was 17. So that, as far as networking, that disappeared. Although I have lots of friends and I've been up there many times to play and record and work with Cape Bretoners over the years. But I moved on and I moved to Boston. I went to school and I lived there for 5 years. And again, I developed a little network. I played with some bands in Boston. Used to do some, believe it or not, I played in a punk band. Played a couple of classic bars in Boston, one called the Cantones, which doesn't exist anymore, and the Rathskeller, the famous punk bars. Nobody that you'd recognize, but we did bash it out a bit. And then I got a gig in Halifax in 1982, and I've never left Halifax. So, but Boston is another sort of distant network that never really, I don't plug into at all. No. The real one is in Halifax, of course, and the maritime musician scene in Halifax that I've been a part of for many years. But I left that and went to the military, when I was 42, which is kind of late in the game to join the military. Again, I kind of left everything behind and moved into that role and spent 17 years in the military. So I've had a few little pools of contacts and networks and things that I've sort of left and moved on a little bit. Some people I keep in touch with, and some great friends over the years that I always stay in touch with. But a lot of stuff has been sort of moved on.
Tom, I have a question for you now. Now here's a funny story. Now, Sean might not even know this. Actually, at 18 years old, my plan was to leave Halifax, and I had some relatives in Boston myself, and I wanted to go to Berklee. That's all I wanted to do was become a full-time musician and learn by the best and stuff like that. But instead, I met Sean McKenna and quit school and went on the road. So that's kind of how that went down. I didn't actually even think about it again, but that was kind of what my plan was. Did you know, everything I read about you is a lot of freelance. I don't remember reading anything that you spent a lot of time in any one band. So did you miss out on that deep find, or were you happy with the way your career went with doing the freelance work?
Well, I spent 5 years probably was the most I've ever spent in any one band. That was the Aviators. So Alex Vaughn, Kenny
Oh,
McKay.
okay.
So early on in Halifax days, I did a stint with Terry Hattie, and then I played with the Aviators for 5 years. You know, and you talked about recordings. I was doing a lot of CBC work at the time, and I was starting a family and had a little, you know, tragic circumstance of health issue with one of my children, and life changed. And what happened was I got a little, you know, discontented with just being a guy that goes to the clubs all the time. Even though I was doing well, making a good living, playing with good people, great friends, still to this day, you know. But I decided that I needed to change. And one of the artists at the time was Lenny Gallant that I had recorded with at CBC. And Lenny called me up looking for a drummer to go on the road with him. And he wasn't calling to ask me to go on the road with him. He actually called for a recommendation, thinking that I wouldn't want to do it. But after some thought, I actually said I'll do it. And I dropped the Aviator thing and started the road work. And, you know, Lenny was maybe close to 5 years. Colin Cross came into the picture for overlapped with Lenny a little bit. And more Bear McNeil, Natalie MacMaster. I toured pretty straight for about 10 years. So, but nobody, you know, the Aviators and Lenny, I get for the longest stint in any band.
So you played with Natalie, so I know. I mean, I'm good buddies with Brad Davich, and Brad always speaks so highly of you. What was that gig like for you? Because I mean, Brad used to tell me you guys used to do a lot of soft seaters down in the States, and it was like kind of a different sort of touring. It was comfortable, not kind of the grunt work that you would normally do. Talk about that.
Well, Brad came in to it in the soft seater world, which was, it's all true. Absolutely, what he speaks of is true. We were touring at that point. Natalie was very successful, and it was soft seater. It was tour bus. You know, great venue. She sold everything out. You know, it was really great work. Prior to that, my first tour was in a van with 5 people. I was the primary driver. We drove all over the United States in a van, kind of like, you know, old school road work with you guys are all familiar with, you know, beating the roads in the Maritimes bar to bar. And there were some soft seaters, there were community halls, there were all kinds of things. Natalie had a very busy schedule. There were years that I did as many as 250 shows in the run of a year. Wow. And didn't leave a lot of time for much else. But, you know, the gig grew as she, you know, gained notoriety and you know, people wanted her for bigger and better things. I did about 3.5 years of that, and through like some of the best places and venues and touring, a lot of European touring earlier on, through Europe, UK a lot. I think about 40 of the United States, lots of great venues, really Hollywood Bowl with Natalie MacMaster voice, you know, like crazy stuff, right? But after a while, you know, the story's the same for a lot of people. Too many hotel rooms, and my kids were growing up at home. Same old story, same old story. And I just kind of went, okay, you know, I've got to get off the road, and I did. And the payoff wasn't there at the time. It wasn't there for me, so I had to make the change. Tough call, but you know, no regrets either.
So you went for the federal gig with the pension and the benefits. I get it.
I got a little pension going on, which is not bad. You know? I didn't do the golden handshake pension. That's like 35 years. I got the 17-year pension. I'm not complaining.
I'm on the debt plan myself, brother. So I'll let you know how it goes for me.
Yeah. So after Natalie, tell everybody what you did after that.
So I didn't have my military gig yet. I kind of just was a bit of limbo. I did some back to sort of freelance work, but I did some theater work over the years, and then I started getting back into Neptune Theatre in the pit band.
Oh, nice.
That first year, Jimmy Rankin was starting his first solo gig. The Song Dog album, I think, was his first solo album, came out. I better get my facts right. Anyway, Jimmy hired me to do his tour, maritime tour. We played a few shows, and at the same time, I was getting geared up to audition for the Stad Band. I won the audition with the band. It was about 7 or so people that went out for it. I ended up winning it, thankfully. And I got that word, so I basically started weaning myself off of my gigs and getting ready to go to boot camp, which I did in the fall 2001. So it was kind of, back, gigs I can get between the fall of 2000 and the fall of 2001 when I joined the military. As soon as I joined the military, small paychecks started coming in. A boot camp, got to the band by December of 2001, and I stayed there until just 3 years ago.
So for anybody who's listening that wants to go that route, wants to do that boot camp thing, wants to audition, talk about that process, because it's not for everybody. You have to go in there with a high degree of confidence. Your chops got to be there. Talk about that, what that process was like.
Well, I'll tell you, it's changed dramatically since I did it. And in Brad Davidge, if you talk to him about it, he'll tell you the same. And in fact, Brad's not doing much with the band anymore because they're no longer hiring, contemporary rhythm section players. They're not hiring guitar players anymore, period. They're not hiring singers anymore. They're not hiring bass players even. That's a secondary instrument. And the drum set, I got hired because I was a drum set player and I could play percussion. As I studied some percussion, and I had some other skills to bring, but now they're really looking for percussionists, like legit guys, the classically trained guys. They want people to play, or military trained maybe, reservists who do the snare drum, bass drum stuff, marching bands. They've really changed the basic format of the structures. The reason actually I got out a little earlier than I could have. I'm not shy about leaving something that I don't really see as right for me anymore. I've done it a few times. Not that it was a horrible thing that I was doing, but it's like, okay, it's not working for me. And money, as important as it is to all of us, has never been the driver for me, even though I've been fortunate to make my living drumming. Even the Stad Band has been the best gig I've ever had paying-wise, but I left it early because it turned into more of a, real standard military marching band and more of than I was comfortable with and wanted to participate in. Lots of reasons, too much, not enough musical reasons and way too many other ones too, guys. But to get into that band now, you would really, the best thing is to go and join one of these reserve bands across the country. There's one in Halifax. There's one other cities across the country that if you're a brass player or a woodwind player, it's still a great gig because, if you're a trombone player, you want to get a gig, good luck, right? Tower Power isn't hiring horn players anymore. It's just, that shit's over, right? So for guys that go to band and go on to university and learn that instrument, they have a possible career in the military, but it comes with a price. You got to join the military. You don't go in there part-time. You're in the military first. I was in the Navy. I was lucky. The job was in Halifax. If the job wasn't in Halifax, they would have sent me to wherever the job was, and they do that routinely, right? Yeah.
So from a creative thing, was that kind of a punch in a hole in your heart? I mean, like, you want to sit there and play in the band, then all of a sudden you gotta, go on a ship and whatever. Like, was that something that maybe as a creative guy, kicked you in the butt?
No, I never had to do any real military. Like, I did go on ship toward the end of my career for a really amazing trip. I sailed on the Fredericton. Most recently, unfortunately, we've all heard about their tragic circumstances. But prior to that, I went to sail with a small combo group, and we went down to Havana, Cuba, Cartagena, and Veracruz, Mexico, with the ship because it was like a protocol, ceremonial kind of thing. They never take a band with them ever. But on this occasion, it was all about ceremonial, having receptions. So they brought a cocktail band with them to do these gigs, which was hilarious, really. But I sailed with the Fredericton for 18 days at sea.
Oh.
That's it. That's the most I've ever sailed in 17 years. The only time I've sailed in 17 years. For the band stuff, it really is about what the music has to offer for you. Like if you asked me about if it was soul sucking, it got there, you know, but it wasn't typically that way. The music changed for me. For many years, I was like drumming for all kinds of environments, you know, really cool ones. The tattoo was just, you know, everybody knows the tattoo in Halifax.
Yeah.
Apart from the band and marching thing, and they used to wheel a drum kit out, and I'd go at it in the middle of the floor with the lights on me for the, you know, a featured performance in the tattoo. So that was kind of fun. I had a lot of great trips with the Stad band as well. I played with a big band, and we played with combos, and a lot of good music that was played. You know, a lot of marching, parades and stuff like that, which got old and did sort of wear on the feet and the mind. But initially, it was a really great career choice for me, and it was that way for at least you know, longer than 10, 12 years, and then it started to change. And when it started to change, I got a little less happy about things.
Well, Tom, tell
That's
me this
fair.
now. You've played many different genres of music. You talked about playing in a punk band. Obviously, you're a jazz player. You would have learned that at Berklee.
I'm not known for my punk playing, no.
But then you would have done, you know, the marching band type of thing. What's your favorite style of music to play?
That's a great question, man, because, you know, that question's been asked so many times, and it usually is you love jazz, so you must love playing jazz the most. And, you know, the question is really what music is best with the musicians you play with, right? So I've played with some fantastic musicians in Halifax and elsewhere. And more than now, I'm playing jazz more than anything because I'm teaching at StFX. I'm the guy down there with I'm the drum department at StFX, for better or for worse. So, and I've been working with the faculty for the last 5 years or so, and visiting artists. So I've played some great jazz. But you know, over the years, man, I played with some great bands. Danny Martin, Salsa Vacante for over 20 years we played, and I played timbales with the Cuban band, and
Nice.
you know, I played in some reggae, and I played some, and you know, with Wayne Nicholson pounding out some rock at my apartment, or you know, like great musicians and a great crew of guys playing good music is what you want to do. The style, you know, if I play jazz with people who don't really know how to play it well, I'm not going to enjoy it. It doesn't matter that it's jazz, but if I play with a really great grooving band, it doesn't have to be jazz. I just want to play good music with good players, right?
So, and you don't want to play jazz with me and Dave, so that'll be we'll throw that out there. But so talk about StFX for a second. So that obviously that's a great gig. So you set the criteria, you come up with the whole program. How does that work? And the other question I have is, how do you work with those kids that are coming in? Because I mean, everybody learns differently. Everybody kind of absorbs things differently. You would probably understand. You and I were coming up. There was one way to learn stuff. And if you didn't learn it the right way, nobody would work with you. And now you have to kind of meet those kids at the level that they're at and how they absorb stuff. So how do you do that?
Well, I think you kind of touched on it already. Everybody that comes into the program comes in at a different spot. And StFX is a small program, so you know, right now I only have one kid per year. You know, like I had one. I lost a kid that didn't come back last year, and you know, I have just 4 kids there, and that's pretty small for a StFX program. But it's been that way for a while now, and it's been that way since I started, for sure. And it was declining in numbers, and it's not alone. It's not StFX. I think it's pretty much across the board in university music programs and lots of other programs. Except for, you know, everybody wants to go to Berklee still if they can afford it, because it's stupid expensive now. Thankfully, it was only, you know, kind of expensive when I went, but it's ridiculous. It's almost unattainable. Humber College is a big joint in Toronto that everybody wants to go to. But locally, the option at StFX is strong. I get to set the program. It is my program. I have to But you know, I studied at a university jazz program, and I've been playing with a lot of people over the years, and I've taken lessons since. You know, I kept my kind of nose into studying, and I keep you know, trying to improve over the years and find out what's relevant, for lack of a better word. But yeah, they're stuck with me though, man. So when they come in, they got to deal with what I have to offer, which is just one guy instead of multiple guys, and they have to you know, show what they know to get in, and then they have to progress to stay in. And you know, university is kind of funny that way because, especially in music, right? It's you shouldn't be grading people on how they play an instrument, but it's the way the system works, so that's the way it has to be.
Right.
You must be interpretive to some degree, but I mean, I'm going to guess that you're obviously a sight reader. You must be. And so my question is this: is like, so do you have to practice that, or if you don't, what's the practice? What's the daily routine of a practice for you?
Okay, so sight reading first. Like, sight reading is a really acquired skill, and like, you know, one of my beefs over the years, and you guys know that the idea of reading music sometimes gets equated with not like grooving, or people got their nose in the music, so therefore they cannot possibly be listening or something, right? And I've always been bothered by that, because I've learned how to read really well, so that I can go in and play with Symphony Nova Scotia, or I can go to the studio and I can lay down tracks in hours, you know, not learning all the tunes by rote before I can go in and record them. It's a skill set. Now, the trouble is, it's true that if you don't learn it well, it can hang you up. So, and there are lots of people who are learning the process, and while they're in the process, they'll get hung up on it and get challenged by it. I was fortunate. I got an early start on reading when I was in band and in school. I did a lot of really great reading through Berklee and percussion ensemble stuff. That was, as the term is, reading fly shit. You know, the notes are so black on the page. So I'm a good reader, and I'm a pretty strong sight reader. And the way to teach that is step by step. And so my drummers will have to read snare drum pieces just for the reading and hand development, and what's called chart reading, which like an ensemble reading for drums, where you learn to play and hit shots as they come by, and to sync up with the music, right? And that's a stage by stage development. And the more you do it, it's like, I equate it all the time with students, that it's like reading your alphabet, man. You cannot read Shakespeare before you read Tom and Betty and, you know, whatever, I said Tom, whatever, you know, the school books, right? And all the others. And anybody who cannot read the English, you know, imagine if somebody was a storyteller and said, yeah, but this guy reads his stories. I mean, he can't really know his stories that well. I mean, no one ever think that about a language. It's music. You just, if you're not really fluent and you're not, you know, having a strong command of the music language, and you can't read it really well, then you're going to stumble, and that may cause problems. But ultimately, you know, it's an advantage to read. That's what I tell my students. That's why I teach it. You know, what was the other part?
That way before. It's a very good point of view, because it's like, if you could hear somebody read, just, you know, read monotone voice, blah 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 blah, versus putting the nuances in and the stops and the starts, and they're accenting a certain part. I never thought of that way before. That's a very valuable point.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. Like, there are fantastic musicians who don't read. Right? Now, there's not a blind musician on the planet that reads music. You know, and a couple of great ones come to mind, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not an either or, you know, it's not like you have to be. It's just, you know, it's an asset, and it's certainly been an asset for me. I wouldn't play Neptune Theatre shows, Symphony Nova Scotia shows, and have over 100 CDs. You know, I might have some of those CDs because we all record, and it doesn't mean that you're going to not be able to record with friends and other people who put music together. But if you're a studio guy and you get a call to go in for a session, and somebody puts something in front of you, they expect you to take care of business pretty quickly, and that's where the reading comes in.
So it's like we rehearsed this beforehand, because as you were talking about that, I had a thought. So you go in and so to transfer the reading to recording, sometimes you're going to go in, you're going to play free form. Sometimes you're going to have to play with a click track. Would you go in with an already written piece? Would you be able to, inject what you want to do? How would that work? I'm sure everything's different, but how would that work?
Well, there are kind of differences in layers of it. Some people write really specific things that they want to hear. And I've been in studios where, even doing percussion overdubs, like, I did some work with Declan O'Doherty, a guy that worked with Rita for years, and John, doesn't matter who, John Allen Cameron. I did a CD with him years ago, where they want you to play a tambourine on the end of 3 every 4th bar. That's it. That's all they want. And you don't need a lot of ink for that, right? He just wants to hear that done. And then you'll get a groove page that says the tune starts here. There's 2 choruses, 3 choruses. This is the basic groove, and then you fill it in the rest of it. And then you get some guys and some circumstances like, I keep going back to Symphony Nova Scotia, but you think about symphony orchestras read everything. They don't go in there and make that shit up, right? No. And in the drum part, that might be the same. So it'll be thick with notes, and there might be some, a groove laid out with do this groove for so long before you change. So you have to interpret that. But it can be really varied about how much, what you put into yourself. But more often than not, it's basically like a template, a sketch of what you want to do, and then you fill in the blanks, because you need to know what you're doing. You can't go in there and not know how to play drums or bass or guitar or whatever and just read the notes purely on the page, unless it is classical music, and that's what they do.
Well, sure. To Sean's point, that's a very good question to ask, because I'm thinking in my head as you're answering that, it's like, so are you getting the callbacks because you're interpreting it the right way, because you're adding a little bit of Tom Roach in there, or are you just getting the callbacks because you can read it so fluently and add the nuances?
Well, I'm not getting any callbacks, first of all.
Sorry. You will now, brother. You will now. We'll make internet famous.
Okay, so all I can tell you is that so Symphony Nova Scotia, they have 30-some musicians on there, and they're professional players who have strong ideas of what they want and personalities. And there's a couple of things at play. And the horn players love me when I come in and lay it down, and they can just float on top of things. And I have some friends in there that have spoken, said really nice things about how solid it feels, Then there's some people that you might be sitting around in the string section that every time a drummer comes in, they're terrified of being overwhelmed with sound. So you have to be mindful of that and do your best under the circumstance to play within the symphony on volume. So drummers can be loud, I can lay it down the best, but you really do have to be attuned to the environment. And then you need to read the page really well and produce the sounds that are for the maestro or the conductor, whoever that happens to be. And I've done those things pretty successfully. Not always. I've gotten glared at for the volume. I've, been beaten up in rehearsals for not doing what was expected of me initially, but that usually comes around, and I can make the adjustments to make it work. So all of those things kind of lock in, and I get the call back.
And that's where the unflappable thing comes in, right, Tom?
Yeah, there's a couple of people that might argue the unflappable thing, but it is. You get beat up, take your lumps. I know a couple of people have heard me kind of moan and complain about that, and the percussion section in Symphony Nova Scotia would have heard me. There was a show a few years ago with them. It was Gershwin. West Side Story is a movie and a musical, and there's a symphony that's written. The music is just written acoustically. So the music from that, it's not the whole movie music, but it's a condensed version of it, and it's drum heavy. If you listen to West Side Story, the musical, there's a lot of action in there with drums, and there's solos, and there's all this. And so I was a featured performer in it. And conductor was pretty hard on me for the first few and then at the end of it, he came over and he was like amazed at, and it was actually jazz musicians he was amazed at. He said that we can make stuff up, which was fascinating to him, right?
Yeah.
But he needed me to do certain things for him, and I was able to produce it. So I guess if that's, I took my lumps and still did it. If that's the unflappable part, that's what you have to be, right? It's like sports or something. You get up and strike out, and you get up again and swing again, and same, hockey, soccer, or whatever. You get knocked down and you get up. So same goes for music, right? You got to take your lumps and give it another go.
So Tom, are you using specific gear for certain gigs then? So if you have a symphony, well, I mean, I'm sure the gear is provided, but I mean, is there a certain snare drum that you're going to use, or certain toms, or certain cymbals that you're using for certain gigs?
If I'm playing a drum set, which I usually am for symphony work, if occasionally I get called in for percussion work on the symphony, but there are people that do that much better than I in Halifax. So they'll go down a list of people who are available, and it's a call sheet. And if they make it to me for a symphony percussion gig, they're into the call sheet pretty deep. They'll provide all the instruments, right? I played timpani, believe it or not. I played one timpani gig with the symphony, which was fantastic, fun, because it was like a pop show, right? Anyway, mostly I get a drum set call. I bring my kit. They do have one there, and I'll use it if it's convenient for rehearsals. But typically, I'll bring my own drums. I use a couple of kits standard for depending on the circumstance. I have a jazz, like a bebop. They're both bebop kits. Small 18-inch drum set, kick drum. Sorry. Don't have a lot of gear that I use. I have a lot of gear that I don't use, but 2 drum sets are go-tos. They're old vintage drums called Camco. They don't make them anymore, but they're DW drums, essentially. That's what they turned into, so that's what they look like. I have Evans, D'Addario. People have been very generous in Evans drum heads on my kit, and Hallmark drumsticks these days. I've been using Sabian cymbals for years. I have a selection that I'll bring in. A couple snare drums I will use depending on the need.
So can we geek out for a couple minutes, because I'm a drummer, so this is going to be fun. So you mentioned Evan head, so I'm guessing I'll coat it.
Well, not the bottoms. Now I typically have just a clear light light head on the bottom of my and then I'm using. Geez, you got me in the spot with the Evans names, because I'm recently acquiring Evans drum heads over the last year or so. What other models have I using? Man, you got me on the spot. I'm gonna be.
That's fine. Just say Evans, bud. Just say Evans. That's all you need to say.
Yeah, I'm gonna lose my.
No, you won't.
No.
Okay, so for cymbals, you said Sabian. So what do you like from those?
So I have a ride that's go to a duo ride that I picked out of the vault, which was fantastic. I've used it for years. I have a Ciccarelli or Cicerelli ride that I used to use a lot. I have fusion hi-hats. I have a Weckel, I think is the Endorsi for the hi-hats. I have a couple of crashes. They're usually 16, HH, and another duo. I don't change them up a lot, and I usually go to, I don't have like a gear heavy rotation. And when I go play jazz, I only put 2 cymbals up. I just play ride and crash. And if I go to the symphony or something else, I'll put a third up for effect and something else. And I haven't been doing any real heavy, big drum gigs for a long time. I haven't done any Latin gigs much lately. I have some splashes, some specific El Sabor kind of splashes that I used to use with timbales in the Latin gigs. But I haven't done a lot of that lately. So.
Okay,
I got more cymbals than I need, and a lovely selection.
So we're still geeking out. So as somebody that's, basically has a drum chair at StFX, I would like, so if I was a new guy that was going to just start to play, and I said, give me 1 or maybe 2 books that would be a good foundation to start with, they would be what?
Well, it's an interesting question, because there's a couple of books that are standard in the jazz repertoire, or old books that like Syncopation was one of them, but not many people know what to do with the book. It's just a list. All it is a Bible of rhythms. you open it up and there's all these rhythms, and they don't have any instruction. They don't have any, you know, there's no methodology to it, right? And what the book was used by teachers, and they give you these patterns to play in certain ways. But there's books that have a lot of instruction built in and a lot of page by page. This is what you do next, and this is what you do next. And one of the books that I use is John Riley, The Art of Bebop Drumming, and it has a real good basic fundamental instruction of what it is to play swing and chime and what they call comping now in the jazz world. You know, piano players and guitar players would think of as comping, but drumming too, you know, the stuff that you play behind the soloists. And there's a section in that book on brushwork, how to play brush styles, and great examples and instruction on how to do that. And then there's another book from the New York Drummers Collective that I worked at for Latin and stuff. It's Bob Wiener and what's the other artist who died? Frankie Malabé. Two guys that did this book years ago out in New York City. And that's Afro-Cuban patterns for drum sets. So that it talks a lot about the origins of hand drumming, congas, and timbales, and then it applies them to the drum set. I use that book when I teach. And the David Garibaldi stuff, the Future Sounds and Groove books. Old book called by Rick Latham, Funk Studies. It's a great book to use. There's others, and there's lots of them, and there's more and more and more of them coming on the market all the time. But there's almost too many of them. Right?
Well, I'm going to throw your name into the hat now, Tom Roach, that you should write a book, and Sean and I will promote the shit out of it. I can promise you that right now.
There's nothing new to write.
Cut.
No, I was going to say I'm going to date myself, but stick control was always the one when I was coming up that everybody said study it.
Oh, and it's a fantastic study, and I wish I would have listened to the people who told me to study it too. You know, stick control is essentially rudiments and various forms of sticking. Right now, people think about sticking, and I don't know if you don't understand what it is, or if nobody knows that stick control and the stickings in there are like, you know, a paradiddle is right, left, right, left, right, left, left. So this stick control is lists of various stickings to practice to get control of rudiments and rudimental playing. And those who play that book got mastery of rudimental control. And the American approach to rudimental playing and drum corps and all that stuff is fundamental in that style of playing. I didn't grow up playing rudiments as a kid. I didn't get a lesson on anything until later, and I have learned some rudimental playing, and I use them quite often. And there's a few of them like paradiddles, paradiddle, diddles, double paradiddles, and Swiss Army rudiments that I use a lot when I play. But I kind of stopped short of getting a full vocabulary of rudimental stuff, and I couldn't play the stick control book, save maybe a collection of them that I already know from other areas, some of the rudiments. But
that's all right, Tom. I've owned it my whole life, and I can't play it either, so don't worry about it.
That's one of the things about that book, right? It's a monster book, and it needs serious dedication. And I have a copy too, you know, but it doesn't matter.
Okay, so here's what I want to do. You got 5.
Okay.
5. I want to hear your top 5 players that you grew up listening to that are your biggest influences.
Okay. So like now, top 5 from when I started, or top 5 best ever? Okay.
Just the top 5 for you.
So Jack DeJohnette, still living legend, right? I basically worked my way through some other styles and some other players and it was landed on the Jack DeJohnette train, and I'm a huge fan. I've had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of times, and did a little stint with him back in '81 at a little place upstate New York. After I finished Berklee, I went to a percussion intensive, that was called, and spent some time. And Jack DeJohnette was one of the teachers a long time ago. But his playing in the jazz vein is, you know, what I wish I would like to play like. You know, that's that's my kind of guy. Earlier on, Elvin Jones was another great jazz player who was very influential in my earlier playing. But he's such a stylized and such a individual approach that, and I never really grabbed that. But I think the fluid nature of his playing was something that I loved, and I'm a pretty fluid player when I play. I think that's one of the things people are surprised at, how little I move and little effort that it is to play. And that might have come from those early Elvin years. Funk players, like everybody, there's so many great players. Like, I just had Chad Wackerman come up to StFX last year before all this shit hit. I came into his playing a little late. I saw him, maybe you guys remember Frank Zappa concert years ago in the 80s. So he was playing with the band at that time. He did many, many years with Zappa and some other great players. He's a consummate sort of studio monster, right? But he's a technician. So I wanted to, and I bought his course on hand development thing on the DW. What's the drum? DW guy has the drum channel. The drum channel. That's it. Anyway, so Chad Wackerman lately has been a kind of a big influencer from a standpoint of technique. Like along the lines of Vinny and guys that play that well and that heavy. Like Steve Gadd and Pagliuca. The late great Jeff Porcaros, guys that played so well. And Chad Wackerman is he's not as flashy maybe in some ways, but he's just a monster. So he was pretty impressive. David Garibaldi, Tower Power stuff. I used to transcribe his stuff when I was in school, try to learn how to play that. Rock guys. I know the greats, the Bonhams and the Moons and all the greats, but I don't know that I ever aspired to be that guy, I wanted to be the jazz guys. Did I get to 5 yet?
One more.
One more. Oh, man. Well, let me think. Jack DeJohnette, Elvin Jones. Well, my first guy, let's just throw him in there, Gene Krupa.
Okay.
That's early on, though, man. I might as well throw him in because it was inspirational to watch when I was young. I didn't know that anybody could do that, and he was a bit of a showman, but he also was a master player. That's old school stuff. But throw him
I thought
in.
it'd be Buddy Rich. I thought Buddy Rich was coming up, but maybe
Yeah,
not.
you know what, Buddy Rich, like he's a phenom, and never is one of those drummers that I wish I could play like that, but I wouldn't.
You turned to an asshole.
Well, you're far too nice because you heard the bus tapes,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly, man. I think that might be it, right? Who wants to be on that bus? So,
yeah, right. Go and do good now, boys. After that time lashing.
yeah.
Listen, we want to be respectful of your time too. Now, Tom, I have one more question for you myself.
Sure.
I'm just trying to buy one more after that. What would somebody be surprised to learn about Tom Roach? Like I said, after all these years, at least 10 years of playing, what would somebody be surprised to learn about Tom Roach?
I guess it's the diversity that people don't understand. I know Sean mentioned some lovely compliments off the top about consistency, but I think I've played a lot of stuff, a lot of styles, and I know people in each of those sort of genres, right? Like I can go hang with people in Havana that I've played with, and I've studied with a guy in Havana, and when he came to Halifax, he was looking for me when he was playing at the jazz festival because he wanted to find Tom Roach. It's like hilarious, but it's the diversity of my little pockets of interests that maybe people aren't aware of. I'm not sure. Some are, some aren't. That I do show up with a tuxedo on and play at the symphony, and then I'll go down to my first year in the military. I played the Tattoo every night, and then as everybody get on their little buses and went on the home, I walked across the street and played Cheers with the Nicholson Band. Right. So I think the variety and the diversity maybe is something that not as many people are aware of in what I do, you know.
Well, and I think you're leaving one out. I think that's humble. Because anytime I've met you, I always like to say that it's great to meet people that are very good at what they do that aren't idiots. And every time I met you, you've been a super good guy.
Thanks,
you know, and I'm glad we did this finally.
me too. I've been called a sandbagger, by the way. I don't know if
A
it's
sandbagger, how much?
with the humble or not, but it's been a couple of times that, you know, I'm just hanging with people, talking and chilling and chatting, and then usually when there's music involved at some point, like at a festival, and then I go up and I play, and they're like, you don't look like you didn't tell me you could play the drums, or you know, blah blah blah. So I don't.
Never playing cards with you, Tom Roach. I'm never playing cards with you.
I don't look. I joke about that a lot. I don't look like the musician, typical drummer type, and a few funny things have happened over the years. But I look more like I've been. You know, maybe I should be driving in the delivery truck out back and not hopping on the kit. But that surprises people from time to time.
Well, I tell you what, the next gig that I play, I'm going to call you up when I'm just playing tunes, and then the solo comes, and we're going to waltz Tom Roach in. You're going to make me look like $1 million.
Okay.
Insert week. We'll be all right.
Yeah. I'm glad we did this, man. I really am. And when all this crap is done, you and I are going to have a beer. I'm going to look forward to that. And I thank you for your time.
Fucking invited or no? Can I come or no?
No, you're a bass player. Nobody wants bass players, right, Tom?
Man. Yeah, we'll leave him in the car and see if he can figure out how to get out of it. Drop him in the car.
Yeah, you mean me carrying gear? That's nice. Yeah, go ahead, drummers. Yeah, talk her up. Boys,
thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure. Thank you so
much.
much.
All right, we'll be in touch, my friend.
Okay, cheers.
Thank you.
So, John, thanks very much, buddy. Take care.
Good night.
Barstools